33 Eyewitness News for Thursday, September 25th, a half hour of news, sports, and weather. Now, here's Tom Peterson.
Good evening, everyone. Today was round 2 of 5 former Youngstown police officers' appeals for reinstatement before the Youngstown Civil Service Commission.
What first began last December today proceeded one step further as 5 former patrolmen convicted in the so-called police burglary ring presented their cases. A few weeks ago, the Civil Service Commission agreed to hear reinstatement cases and subpoena witnesses.
I'm going to take a look at each case and make a ruling on each case on an individual basis, and we've set up these private hearings to go over each one separately. Because there's some aspects, all cases aren't exactly the same, and they resign under different circumstances. So we're trying to take a look at the whole picture rather than bits and parts.
Witnesses ranging from Chief Baker to Mayor Hunter and FOP President Nick DeLisio stated their recollections of the scandal and the extent of each individual's involvement. Questioning in 2 of the private sessions dealt with substantiating the fact that the former policeman had indeed been promised immunity, and Chief Baker was informed of the police burglaries 18 months prior to their eventual exposure. There's no indication how soon the Civil Service Commission will rule. One former policeman told me there's a very strong possibility he'll ask federal court to overturn his year-old petty larceny conviction, believing his constitutional rights have been violated. From downtown Youngstown, Andrea Wood, Eyewitness News.
Pennsylvania's Governor MILTON SHAPP has entered an already crowded field for the Democratic presidential nomination, and he's not expected to be the last to announce. SHAPP, re-elected governor of the nation's 3rd largest state in 1974, announced his intentions today in the nation's capital.
Washington press conference packed with supporters from his home state. Governor MILTON SHAPP of Pennsylvania became the 8th announced candidate for next year's Democratic presidential nomination. The governor said the country's economic problems will be the big issue of the campaign, promised to put America back to work if he makes it to the White House, and said none of the other candidates are catching on with the public.
None of the Democratic candidates who have been out in the hustings for many, many months now have shown any appeal to the American public. And the reason for it, I believe, is that they have not been out there talking specifically to the people about how they would cure the major problems that this country has. I believe as during the next few months as I get out and talk common sense about the need to set up an investment program, a new budgeting system, and to cure some of the other ills of this country and become better known outside of my own state, that I'm going to do a lot better than what any of the other candidates so far have shown.
The governor's most serious problem is what politicians call the recognition factor. Few voters outside of Pennsylvania have heard of him. His chances of becoming the Democratic candidate for president appear slim. Bob Clark, ABC News, Washington.
Meanwhile, some Ohio Democrats are touting Senator John Glenn as possible presidential timber. In a letter to the Cuyahoga County Party co-chairman today, Congressman Ron Mottle says there is no clear leadership among the 8 already announced candidates and that Glenn was the kind of a man who comes along once in a lifetime. Mottle wants to initiate a draft Glenn movement, and he wants the help of Cuyahoga County Democrats. United Steelworkers Local 4150 at the Rockwell International Newton Falls bumper plant today angrily responded to the company's reasons for closing that facility.
The union says Rockwell gave them a bum rap in mainly blaming labor disputes for the closing, when in reality, union officials believe the real problems may be EPA requirements, a lack of cash flow, and poor economic conditions in the automobile industry.
In the area of some of the issues submitted by the company, whether the union would agree to it or not, I look back at the history of this plant, and the history will show they've been working a 6-7-day week for at least the past 8 or 10 years, and the record would also show that they've generated a great deal of profit in working 6 and 7 days a week with a full complement of people with the same existing conditions that exist today.
A 3-year contract was signed last September, and although management requested discussions of 15 points primarily dealing with productivity a year ago, the matter was not brought up again until September 3rd of this year. Talks were held September 11th for the final time, and the union says the demand of giving up seniority rights is a sacred cow that can never be compromised. In addition, no assurances were given by the company that in exchange for coming to terms, the plant would stay open. Steelworkers resent the involvement of the Western Reserve Economic and Development Agency in the so-called labor dispute, which they say only muddied the waters. The union says they'll meet with management at any time to save the 900 jobs, hopefully as soon as tomorrow. Andrea Wood, Eyewitness News.
A diary was kept by the Symbionese Liberation Army that may tell something about the activities of Patty Hearst during her 19 months of hiding.
ABC News has learned that a diary found in the San Francisco apartment where Bill and Emily Harris were hiding was in the handwriting of Patty Hearst. Only a few investigators have actually read the diary, and specific information has not been disclosed. The diary reportedly contains references to SLA activities over many months. Other sources have told ABC News that investigators think the SLA was involved in more than 30 unsolved crimes.
Several bomb incidents are on the list, including this destruction of a police car in Emeryville, California.
From the information that we've accumulated, it appears to be somewhat identical to the ingredients and the materials that they had in the Harris and the Hearst home.
Unexploded bombs found in the Harris apartment are also said to be similar to this one found under a San Francisco police car and to 2 bombs found under police cars in Los Angeles last month. On the Harris...
County Dog Warden answers questions about free-running dogs. That's next, coming up on Eyewitness News.
Just before the turn of the century, when millions of people came to the new land, New York was filled with all kinds of language and dress and old-world cooking. A lot of their cooking was done with Muller's macaroni, just like today. More people in this land eat Muller's macaroni than any other kind, because nothing goes with everything like Muller's.
Wendy's old-fashioned hamburgers, they're cooked to order just for you. Your choice. We'll fix your hamburgers however you say. Your choice. 256 different ways. Choose a single, a quarter pound, a double, a half pound, a triple, 3/4 pounds of meat. Your choice. Down at Wendy's, where quality is our recipe.
The plight of an 11-year-old Austintown girl points up a growing problem here in Mahoning County of dogs running loose by the scores. Susan Barger of Chaucer Lane, Austintown, was bitten by a German Shepherd back on September the 11th. That occurred in her yard. Another youngster was bitten the same day, also by a shepherd, right nearby. On Monday, this past Monday, the Barger girl began a series of 14 rabies shots because that shepherd could not be found. Well, this week, Youngstown City Council wanted to know why dogs are not kept on leashes or at least under their owner's control. At the county dog pound, where many strays wind up, there is a different perspective on the situation. According to dog warden Daniel Pecchio, state law requires only that dogs must be under reasonable control, not necessarily tied to a leash.
There's a leash law in the city of Youngstown, but there's no state leash law. Most people confuse this with the leash law of Ohio. The law of Ohio is that a dog has to be under reasonable control at all times. Now, in the city of Youngstown, you can be arrested if your dog is not on a leash. But in the state, outside the townships and in the rural areas, he has to be under reasonable control. There seems to be a lot of understanding there's a state leash law. There is no such thing as a state leash law.
What about these packs of dogs that sometimes are roaming around? Do you have any control over them?
Yeah, most packs of dogs are caused by usually a female coming into season. And they gather with the schoolyards and playgrounds. And this is where most of our problems are existing right now, in the schoolyards.
The fact is that most of those free-running dogs do have owners and are not stray dogs. The Northeast Ohio Manpower Consortium today hired an independent auditor to aid its investigation of payroll irregularities. The problems arose last week when it was discovered that at least 3 summer youth program time cards were allegedly either forged or altered. Consortium Director Robert Zook today said the investigation will cover the federally funded summer program administration as well as the altered time cards. And he said, quote, "We don't know where an audit leaves off and legal action begins."
Myself or my staff are not legal experts and we're not auditors. and the auditing firm may find some problems that would involve further legal action. And if this is the case, I think the executive committee would have to take a very strong, long, hard look at what they would want to do to make any adjustments or corrections to what has been done improperly.
This morning, the Executive Committee of the Consortium ratified the suspension of Work Experience Director Juan Rios. Is he suspected in any way of involvement in this situation? And if not, what are his chances of being rehired?
No, this does not mean that he's implicated. In fact, in private industry or any organization, it's standard procedure to suspend the director of an organization or of a program pending the outcome of an investigation.
Zook added the final audit report is due at the consortium's next executive committee meeting on October the 7th. At that time, the committee will decide if further examination of the time card incidents are necessary or even if legal action is required. Coming up next on Eyewitness News, the late J. Edgar Hoover permitted break-ins in certain circumstances. That fact came up today before the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Sparkle, a cost-cutter price on grade A medium eggs, 56 cents a dozen.
Remember, you have lots more money to spend when you shop Sparkle, the cost cutters.
The ever-popular Dinah Shore comes to Channel 33 with a bright new entertainment variety show weekday mornings at 9. Dinah is 90 minutes of music, laughs, and conversation with distinguished guests and exciting new talent. Make a date for coffee with Dinah, weekday mornings at 9 here on WYTV, the best show in town.
The Senate Intelligence Committee today learned that the FBI had long accepted that so-called Houston plan of allowing break-ins of domestic subversion centers. But in 1970, the late J. Edgar Hoover had been credited with stopping such incidents.
The scrawled note, "No more such techniques must be used," with J. Edgar Hoover's initial H, ended black bag operations in 1966. But it was retired FBI man Charles Brennan's misfortune to be caught in the witness chair today when the details were finally made public. Overnight, the Bureau had supplied the number to the committee. At least 238 break-ins in 24 years, but many more for which there are no records. For the most part, Brennan and the FBI were looking for evidence foreign powers were behind domestic dissenters.
Even though illegal, the purpose sought to be achieved was sufficiently important that you felt the law could be violated.
Yes, sir, I did.
But you couldn't get any hard evidence.
I personally did not suspect that